Could I have a roll call, please?
Chairman Matthew Poplar,
Here.
Member John Eric Hoover,
Here.
Member Denise McKenzie,
Present.
Member Todd McClary. Let the record show that Member Todd McClary is absent from today's meeting.
We don't have any minutes today, do we?
No minutes today.
Really? That's too bad. Comments from the general public. I see none have signed up, so we will move on from there. Unless there's, okay, thank you. Comments from the board and city manager. I have none. Start Denise having none. None. Nobody has any comments. So we'll move right to the agenda. Number one, we'll start with the comprehensive land use plan update. And we're going to call in the planner.
Tammy Verona Consulting, and it is called a comprehensive plan. Comprehensive land use plan is something that you guys came up with, but it's a comprehensive plan. So, just for clarification. So, just to refresh everybody, we have been working on the update of the conservation and coastal management element that included 5 new goals, objectives, and also policies. So the remaining goal that we have to address is goal number 5, which is community and partner engagement. And the goal is to actively involve our community and partners in learning about and addressing issues related to conservation and coastal management to foster a culture of preparedness, resiliency, and sustainability. And there are 2 objectives under this goal. The first one, 5.1, relates to engaging with the community, and the second one is related to engaging with community partners. And so these are new. So in the past, we've had some policies that were existing in your comprehensive plan that we moved over or we modified slightly. But in this particular case, it's a whole new set of policies, so they're all new. The objectives and the policies. So at last time, or the time before that, I had a big long list of things that I had researched from other communities, and this is sort of a summary or a condensation of those. But certainly, if there are any additions to this, if anything's missing, or if we want to modify any of these to make them more descriptive or identify specific programs that you know of as an example, I'm happy to make any sort of modifications that you would like to see. So let's go ahead, just get started. I'll get going and you guys can jump in. So the very first policy relates to preparedness communications. So making sure that you're doing what you are already doing in notifying the community about preparedness activities prior to hurricane season, and just anything else that I know you do, social media posts and different types of newsletters, town hall meetings and things like that. So continue doing what you're doing to make sure that people know about how to be prepared in the face of potential natural disasters. The next policy, 5.1, risk education. So raising awareness on the flood risks in the community to encourage participation in flood reduction activities to potentially lower property insurance premiums. And so that, that's related to your community rating system participation. The next one is conducting, also related to CRS, is conduct National Flood Insurance Program workshops on the benefits of acquiring flood insurance to encourage widespread adoption. So that dropped off there a little bit. 1.1 or 5.1.4 is stormwater management awareness. So raising awareness about responsible stormwater management, probably practices. Let's put that practices in there. And encourage actions such as rainwater harvesting and proper disposal of pollutants to reduce the impact of stormwater runoff on local ecosystems and stormwater infrastructure. So thinking about water quantity and also water quality. And there are things that people can do on their property, such as the rain gardens where you have little depressions and you plant them, and they hold water and they soak up water, and they also provide habitat for pollinators and different types of little creatures. The next policy is 5.1.5, so species and habitat protection. So implementing educational programs to increase awareness of species and habitat protection practices to promote biodiversity and conservation of local ecosystem. And those could be, carried out in concert with partners, which we'll talk about a little bit later, such as the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, which operates an extension office here in the county. They're a wealth of information and enthusiasm about practices to educate the community. So they're great partners. The next is 5.1.6. So in holding those community engagement events as you do. So it's noting your town hall meetings, special workshops, volunteer activities. I know in my community, people get together and they pick the air potatoes once a year. They get out there, and so those are ways that kind of hands-on ways to engage the community. The next 5.1.7 relates to hazardous waste education. So, educating the community, probably in conjunction with the county. I'm sure they have materials available on proper disposal of medicines, chemicals, batteries, and other hazardous materials, so that we're preventing pollution and safeguarding the water quality in the community. The next relates to water conservation. So raising awareness of water conservation practices through literature, signage, utility bill inserts, press releases, and social media to encourage water-saving behaviors to ensure a sustainable water supply. 5.1.9 is conservation volunteerism. So launching programs on such things as habitat restoration or monitoring to engage residents in those activities and foster a sense of stewardship. 5.1.10, educational programs at parks, promoting environmental education at parks, focusing on natural environment and conservation practices to enhance public understanding and appreciation of local natural resources. 5.1.10, missing a one there, community garden grants. So consider creating grants to help the community establish community gardens within the community, and those are, promote green spaces, sustainable land use practices, providing local food, so you're reducing food miles, and also just brings the community together on a common project. Monitoring and early warning systems, so monitoring sea level rise, storm surge, and rainfall patterns, and implement early warning systems for timely alerts to residents and emergency responders to improve preparedness and response to flood events. And that could be something like your Facebook page. I know you've used the Nixle program in the past, and things like that. And also coordination with the county and their resources. And the last one in this section is 5.1.12, reconstruction plans engagement. So this is following a disaster. So making sure that you're engaging the community on those engagement opportunities, decision-making processes, so that you can incorporate community feedback to understand community needs and also get their feedback on actions that are to be taken place. Are there any questions on the first set? Any additions or suggestions?
I guess from my knowledge, if we go back to like 5.1.5, species and habitat protection education, when we make statements in this plan that says implement educational programs, and let's say we don't end up doing that, is that an issue? I'm assuming it was, and I guess the question is should we word these in a way where we, it's a goal of ours, seek to implement? Or
we can do that. There's, you make a best effort to do these things. I think the things that you must follow are the standards. But in this particular case, you just want to say explore, identify.
Yeah, it just concerns me that if we all these things, if we lock ourselves into having to do that,
Yeah.
which I mean, we'd want to obviously, but obviously there's a lot here, and we've got lots of
I
other
think
stuff to
that-
worry about as well.
And we had talked about that last time. And I think Mr. McClary said that, well, you just do one thing and you've done it, so over the course of this whole span, but I can soften those if you'd like. Either way, I mean, it's a win if you do it.
What do you guys think?
I mean, sounds like you're giving us an out, but do we need an out?
Well, I think that the goal would be to do it, and it gets given us an out would be, if it's something that, because everything, especially from the educational perspective, if we put something on, or if it's in house, then it's not a big deal, right? Because we've got paid staff already doing it. But if we have to contract out for a trainer, it costs money. It just depends on what level of stuff we need to do.
Yeah, I think I would suggest
But I
that.
don't know we have anybody in house that could do that particularly, right? That
Yeah,
sounds like a
and this
contractor
probably
type
is
thing.
like in collaboration with the community groups or local agencies like the extension office. I don't think that you necessarily have to spend money on things other than maybe buying bottled water or something when you get people together. But we certainly, I think, for those that are a little bit more softer requirements. But I think, like, relative to your CRS, you probably want to show, yes, you're doing notifications, because I think that if anybody's scrutinizing this, they want to know, yes, you are.
Yeah, and I'm less concerned with having an out as opposed to missing something inadvertently and
Yeah.
being sued or whatever,
Yeah,
that
right.
kind of thing.
And I know you guys you're small cities, resources are sometimes not, human resources are sometimes not available to get. Certainly I can put the explore, consider, that sort of thing. Not a problem.
It's capital COPRG.
Pardon me. It was just hot. It needed to cool down.
Capital COPRG, and then just lowercase the rest of yes. I guess I don't have that much of a problem with the way this is worded. I think, again, most of these, it's our goal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not necessarily saying you have to do it, but this is what our goal is. I don't know if changing that changes what our goal is, I guess.
I think if you were to say things like, require
Right.
the standards that you're imposing upon, but certainly you don't want to.
If you say shall implement educational programs, that is more of a, that word is a bad word to use.
And then even and you could think about this sort of blanketly over the course of the entire comp plan, that you want to be, conscientious of your policies. But this particular case, relative to community engagement, you're going to be doing a lot of things, and sometimes you don't get to one. But this is a years-long process too. So typically, you're every 7 years, and they're not even really asking you to go policy by policy anymore to see how you're implementing things. So it's probably more of just a laundry list of things that to plant the seeds for activities.
Yeah.
But
And it's a goal, right? So that in itself means it may not be achieved, I guess. I don't know much about how these things,
Yeah.
what kind of teeth they have to them. I just want to be understanding of what we're saying here. If we put implement, does that mean we need to start looking at getting something together to actually do that?
Is our password COPR? Yep. Is it? Just wanted to check myself. I'm sorry.
No, is it? Like I said, I'm just from my
I
understanding.
think for a few of these, I could look like for 5.1.9, launch a volunteer program focused on. I think it would be consider or explore launching. And a lot of times you may have people in your community that look through your comp plan and say, hey, I would like to be a part of that. Let me lead it. sometimes it's a community-led initiative that comes by virtue of, or somebody else comes in without even looking at the comp plan and they want to do it, and you've partnered with a community group. But I think the important thing is that you have some things to reach for, but certainly I can go through and
Yeah, a lot of these,
Yeah.
because of that, we probably get a volunteer to come in and do a
absolutely. Yeah.
thing. I mean, definitely do. I just want to make sure that
No,
how
I
we're
think,
writing
I think
this up,
that's
that
I think that's a
we
good
just
comment.
understand what we're doing. Because I think in the past, some of the stuff it's been done because it's a requirement. It gets shelved and then not looked at. Stuff
Yeah.
doesn't happen, and
Well,
I want to make sure whatever we're doing
they
here,
are
we're actually.
aspirational documents, except for your density, intensity, and level of service standards. Those are kind of the incompatibility measures things. Okay,
Thanks.
you're welcome. 5.2 community partnerships. So that's fostering partnerships and leveraging resources to address conservation and coastal management issues. The first one relates to flood risk management collaborations, which you do relative to your local mitigation strategy and also resilience planning. 5.2.2 flood zone designation engagement. So engaging with FEMA and local authorities to understand and potentially revise flood zone designations based on data and risk reduction measures to ensure accurate flood risk assessment and appropriate zone mapping, which you do. Water quality collaboration, 5.2.3. So collaborating with state and local governments such as the Southwest Florida Water Management District, property owners, residents, and others to improve coastal and riverine water quality in support of fish and wildlife populations and the sustainability of these resources. 5.2.4, disaster recovery partnerships. So collaborating with the different partners, private nonprofit organizations, the whole gamut of community interests and organizations to expedite your post-disaster business continuity and housing review, all the things that you need to do, the big things that you got to do after a disaster. 5.2.5 is also partnering, that making sure that you are reaching the vulnerable residents in the community to make sure that they're safe before and after a disaster. 5.2.6, vertical oyster garden initiative. So engage university researchers and community volunteers in the design, implementation, and monitoring of vertical oyster gardens in suitable locations. Is that one that you think looks like a hard one, or does that look soft enough to, I guess if you don't get buy-in from the university researchers, you've reached out, right? But would you like that one to be a little softer?
I mean, I just think we have that's kind of going on now. I think they're kind of reaching out. I think it's something very real. It's probably going to happen.
Well, you have your new committee. That's
Right, 21-25.
Yeah.
Committee. Yeah. So
Probably
it's
easy
probably
to
fine.
get through. And the very last one is, and I don't know if the Development Services Department provides any information on green building or what sort of materials might be already out there for alerting property owners or developers on, energy efficiency. Sally, do you know if anything like that is promoted in the Development Services Department for green building information? Green building, such as energy efficiency, disaster resistant building practices, low impact development, anything like that that's already being handed out, like in pamphlets.
I have to check with them to see if they have that
Yeah,
information.
I don't think we do that.
Yeah.
I think maybe in the process when they're having conversations about what they're doing, there may be some information given out, but I don't think we actively do that.
I think for this one, because it's under partners, we should add something about reaching out to a partner who provides that information to be able to.
Yeah.
I know that, like when I was over in Pasco County Emergency operations center, they had lots of things that you could hand out if you wanted to, like little pamphlets and binders and things like that. So
Well, I think going forward with when we start changing like some of our floodplain management stuff and moving up the how we want people to build, I think it's kind of natural that there'll be information
yeah.
related to that going out,
Mm-hmm.
and just from potentially looking at like Water Star or even Energy Star.
Energy Star,
There
Water
might
Star.
there might be definitely propaganda from those agencies that can be a part of a packet that we give out to people that are going to be applying or have applied or however that looks.
And then I wonder, I'm sure that FEMA provides disaster resistant building practices materials. Okay. Yeah, let me modify that one. Anything else that you're doing now? Any new initiatives or community engagement sort of things that we might reflect in this set of policies? I know you're doing the town hall meetings. You're doing your notifications for pre-hurricane season. Were you doing something with community gardens? Asking him. Community.
We will be, yes.
Okay.
I think that's a piece.
And is that you're providing property or funding, or what is it you're doing?
Well, it's a property that we've acquired through the county, through FEMA, that we're
lots.
going to be putting community gardens on. We're
Okay.
working with the CAC and
OCAC.
residents. Yeah,
Okay. So it's a community led.
Yeah.
Sort of.
correct. Anybody like to comment on that?
Dave Miller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. Just on.
There you go.
There you go. Dave Mueller, 5439 Blue Point Drive. My thought was, with regard to that one, I know we have a building department that would approve building permits, but could a pamphlet or something be incorporated into that process so that we build a checklist of things that we, when somebody comes in for a permit, we walk them down a path and they got to have A, B, and C for this kind of building. And, oh, by the way, here's something that you want to do for a green building or something you might give this consideration. So, I mean, we could incorporate that into our standard procedures. So just a thought.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? So I think that with this set of policies, the conservation and coastal management element, we previously had talked about those sort of like individual policies that came about from the evaluation of the comp plan relative to state statutes. So we had gone through all of those. The only thing that we had left was the water supply facilities work plan. And I think that's it. So I reached out to the state today just to let them know where we were. That bounced back. I think maybe Barbara, I don't know where Barbara is, but I have Colin to find out who the rep is because they have regional reps. Just to touch base with them and say that, we're in the process. We're thinking about maybe a planning and zoning board hearing in August.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that there's a meeting next week, so we probably need to. There's not a meeting next week?
Yeah, there is, but we wouldn't be able to get it.
No, we can't.
Yeah.
So we'll package that up with the staff report, take it to the planning and zoning board. Oh, actually, it's planning and zoning board. I thought there was one more, but that's not.
Yeah.
Take it to the planning and zoning board for their recommendation, and then a first reading with the city council. So that could happen within.
Do we have to do the same notice?
Yeah, we
for
can do
that?
the same notice.
Okay.
Mhm.
Maybe we don't have. Do we have to have the ordinance as well, or?
Just an ordinance number and a title.
Okay.
So, and I can help you with that. And then we'll ship it off to the state. And then also Pasco County, I'm not sure if Newport Richey needs to get one as well. And then everybody will have their 60 days or 30 days to review, and then the state will do their follow-up report in the next 30 days. And then we'll bring it back to City Council for that second ordinance reading. And then there's like a 21-day appeal period. So that'll be done.
Anything else on that? Good. Anybody in the public want to comment on that? Excellent. We'll move on to the next item. And in your packets are the scope of work for the next phase of the Cody River Landing planning.
I didn't even know we were doing that. Okay, let me pull it up. I'm
We're
ready.
moving things forward, man. We don't
I
want
know,
to. We
I
don't want to
know.
wait.
I guess I didn't look at the agenda. Sorry about that. Okay, Cody River Landing and scope outline. Okay. So what I did was, following the survey and the analysis of the findings, I set forth or put together this sort of outline as an approach for how you could address changes to the city's comprehensive plan and land development code to implement the community's vision. So I went for a little bit of effort here to talk about the background, to give what I thought was the understanding of what we were trying to do. And so I set out 4 different things, and these are not necessarily, it's more of a menu than it is necessarily like a process or a sequence of items. But what we'd really be trying to get to would be a regulating plan. That's the big thing. So we would look at, think through what sort of planning, what kind of regulations would need to be applied to this area, any sort of design considerations that we would think through and lay out, and those would inform your comp plan, and those would inform your land development code. So it's sort of like it's just the planning for the amendments that you would go forward with. One of the things that I was thinking there was an opportunity for, because you have this relatively low density and intensity that's out there right now, actually across your city, that you might think about a transfer development rights program, because the community was interested in more low-rise buildings along your waterfront, but there was more of a tolerance or aptitude, or what's the word, interest, I guess, in taller buildings in the US 19 corridor and some other places. You could also provide some of that density and intensity through performance. So for instance, if you decided that you wanted to entertain more density and intensity, that there need to be certain things that would help to make those urban environments more livable, sidewalks and public space, and whatever it is. And we have a list of things within that survey result that really shows what people would like to see out there in terms of amenities and public space.
I could interrupt. So, first, we do have already in the code that concept of transfer development rights, but it's strictly for the wetland issues, right? And upland, I think.
I don't know that yours is. Newport Richey's is for the coastal high hazard area. I don't know if was yours wetland.
Yeah, that's
wetland.
in looking at it. It's
So you
pretty
have
much
the
what-
mechanism, it's there.
Yeah.
So it's not entirely new, but this would be more of, think about in terms of versus like sending things from an environmental area into a city. So a sending area and a receiving area, you would think about it more in like historic preservation, or it's urban TDR programs.
Right.
So
and that's, I guess, where I was going was that I knew that you were talking about it a little bit differently than
Yeah.
the way it already is in there. And
Yeah.
so from the land use plan perspective, what needs to be changed with it or it just needs to be added, or if you could address that, because I think that's in the end on that piece on the regulating plan that I think we need to do something different into the land use plan for it.
Right. So I think what you would do, and like I said, this all needs to be sort of like, planned out because there's a lot of moving parts and it's not difficult. It just needs to be thought through. So in the comprehensive plan under a land use category specific to, and it could be 3 different categories because you've got those 3 zones. It depends on if things are like each other, they can have the same category, but if they're not, so we have US 19 is a different animal than the waterfront areas. So what you would do is you would identify that within those categories, there would be the potential for density and intensity to be of a certain level, but you'd need to perhaps transfer from someplace else, or you'd have to figure out what the triggers were to be able to reach that higher density. So I don't know if that's like clear or not. I wish I had brought some slides, but I didn't even think that through.
Would it go as far as, again, what we would put in the comprehensive plan, go as far as laying out, creation of a bank? So, or would it just be really high? You need to do this, but not maybe get into the details.
Well, if somebody came in and they didn't want to use the extra density, then they wouldn't have to do anything. They could just build the property. But you could make it to where if you wanted to be able to utilize additional density and intensity, you'd have to get that from somewhere, right? So then that would create a market to help those properties that are on the water where the community wants to see lower buildings to be able to essentially take that increment of density or intensity and sell it to somebody where they could use it. And that the way that could be handled would be, there's a couple different ways of, I think Newport Richey banks theirs, but I think they largely owned the property. So they had public lands that had density, intensity entitled in those areas. And so they just said, these areas have this many units. So we have a unit pool, and when somebody comes in, they can, I guess, buy them, or I don't know. We'd have to think that through as far as what, because there would need to be a value, and I know there's some implications for market-based value versus other ways of doing that, just to make sure that it's always high enough. I'm not an expert on the financial end of it, but we certainly would seek out development or people that would help us understand that, finance people help us understand that. But I know that it doesn't have to be complicated, but it just has to work for your context, your market, and your companies.
Can you cap that for an area, or is it uncapped?
Yeah, so I think that what you could do is an area. You could do an area-wide density intensity, and then it would be a pool, and then you could maybe the first ones in, if you wanted to use those, there'd be sort of an incentive to get it in early. So you could say, well, we have this much available or potential rights, and once they're gone, they're gone. I think they do that on Clearwater Beach. They have a density pool, but it's more related to traffic. So they had a number of trips, units and trips, and they knew they had a carrying capacity, so to speak. So yeah, you could look at it in terms of an overall area wide or some sort of a density pool. But the objective would be to be able to transfer it from one place that you wanted to keep things low to other places that the community wouldn't mind being taller, because one's subsidizing the other thing that they want. So understanding that wrote this, that there was a developer who's interested in a couple of parcels, I thought that letting there be a time to thoughtfully go through this process of creating a regulating plan, comprehensive plan amendments, and land development code, which we have submitted a state grant for, so maybe there would be money to do that. At the same time, you could be in a special circumstance doing a development agreement with these developers and then working with them on how, like testing these concepts for transfer development rights. Of course, that wouldn't be in play, but we could see how the development could be allocated across those properties. And looking at design considerations, parking, the whole gamut of things that you would need to consider as you're thinking about land development code regulation. And so, as I said, it would be real world data and feedback based on an actual case as opposed to just conceptual.
I'm
And
not
then
entirely, excuse me,
I'm sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
not entirely sure that we should be using what the developer is proposing as a baseline for changing our code. And we've got all this great feedback from the community, and to kind of ignore that, I think is irresponsible.
And I hear what you're saying. But one of the things that we always do when we're looking at code plan and code revisions is to have community engagement. And that includes people who own property and people who are developers, because you want to have the fullness of information. Because there were some things that the community wants to see out there, even though they did have an aversion to anything too tall on the waterfront. The survey was one step, but having people, that's why we have engagement down here below, offering an opportunity for the community to be hands-on with this information so that they could come to those conclusions, because the survey was not educational, right? It was, you were given choices, maybe you understood, maybe there's some things that, I know there was one question in particular that wasn't like, it was just not well suited for that environment, that survey environment. If you were to have people come together, you could explain things and say, well, these are community objectives and these are community objectives. How do we marry these things? How do we come to like a balance? Because I think that's what we want, a consensus of the community. And the survey isn't really consensus building. It's more of just a sense of what it is that people would like to see out there. I mean, it's not to be discounted for sure, because it's really valuable information. And there was a lot of it, a lot of valuable information. But in working with a developer, you could at least, you could understand, well, when you're building a building, this is what you need to do relative to parking. And this is what it looks like when you start to design out the horizontal space, and what's going on out there with floodplain, or there's a lot of things that you don't necessarily have really detailed information when you're just writing a code. It's a little bit, you try to understand as much as you can about an area, but invariably you get into it and you say, oh, we've got to tweak our code because we didn't see something, there was a blind spot or whatever. So that's where I was thinking that in working with an actual development, it would be a collaboration.
You're not speaking of like the developer who had a proposal for us.
Well, I was thinking of that because I knew that was on the table, but not necessarily understanding what they were asking for. I just knew that it was an interest. But we would talk to all the property owners. I think the community should, or the city should have engagement with everybody who has an interest on both sides of US 19, along US 19. What are they thinking of doing with their properties? How would development affect where they live in that, sometimes people don't have any designs on their property and they just want to be there. So you look at potential for impacts, on adjacent properties and things that are standing in the way of progress, what the community wants to achieve, what they're able to afford. There's just needs. What are the needs? And then how can development within a community help satisfy some of that? It's a complicated mix of information, but it's important to listen from all the stakeholders.
And one way to obviously look at this is that if you take all the developers out of the picture, this framework needs to be looked at for any developer to come in, whatever they want. Just in fact, we had a real case scenario. This is, and there's real no hardcore plans behind it. They didn't have, they had ideas, visions, or whatever, but it gave us something to use as an example. And it could be somebody comes along wants even more than that, less, or whatever. This is a real world example that, this is somebody that's interested in the properties down there. But the important part is we had framework in place so that there can be negotiations in the future with whatever comes. And we don't have that ability now. So that's my understanding. That's what the purpose of this is to put something in place so that, if somebody comes along and wants to do X, right now we don't have any negotiating power to do anything.
This is really, I know you have a waterfront overlay district, and that was going in that direction to have something that was very tailored to this area. Granted, it only covers Cody Ver Landing, doesn't happen the US 19, the other side of although it was initially thought of to include the east side for whatever reason, maybe just to bite off a small piece and then start from there. That might have been the reason. But yeah, it needs to be your comp plan and your land development code will not meet the needs of this area. It's a special district, and right now it is lumped in with every other residential or commercial mixed use category. I mean, it needs to have a special set of standards, and that's what this process would do. Now, it's not to say that it's predetermined as to what density and intensity would be adopted out there, right? I mean, that's where you have to see, can you meet the level of service standards? What about traffic? I was telling the city manager there's a workshop or a webinar coming up, but US 19 is on the state strategic intermodal system. They care about those systems. There's only 2 in Pasco County, 19 and 75. So, what is the capacity for growth in this area relative to water, sewer, stormwater, traffic, parks and rec? I think that was solid waste. And stormwater. Well, I think stormwater was there as well. So there are some parameters that you need to fit in. Design considerations, right now what your code allows, I think it's like 50% of the area can be covered with the building side, but is that kind of in line with what your resiliency objectives are? I was listening to a statewide meeting for the Florida Transportation Plan, and they were saying how because of these urbanized areas and so much rain that we're getting, that floodplains getting bigger because there's no place for the water to go. And also there's no place for the water to get into the aquifer to recharge, to provide, so there needs to be a sustainability, resiliency lens that you look at these things. So,
including our infrastructure and blight around the city, and we're not going to attract many developers so that we have, the idea would be that we have a choice. We have many developers coming and wanting to buy the properties and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and we get to choose because we're the ones in control. But nobody's going to come here when there's a lot of, they have to drive through junky areas to get there. So that's got to be part of this.
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot of buyers down there trying to buy this stuff, and it's the reason being is because that there's nothing that can really be done there but car washes, storage units.
But it's not even nice to look at, So I mean, even the neighborhood areas, there's lots that needs to be cleaned up there.
Plays a role.
It's not going to attract. It definitely plays a role. So I think that needs to be prioritized as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that you could find out from the real estate industry is, what is it that when someone's buying land, what are they looking for in terms of return on investment? And if there isn't enough potential in those, then there's not really a market.
Right.
So it's like you've cut off the market. And I think, there's always going to be change in a community. It needs to be managed well. But for something to stand still is essentially unless it's perfect. The way, if it's Nantucket and, nobody wants to change a hair because, it's like in amber, sudden, it's a special jewel that nobody's ever going to touch. But they do change on Nantucket. They do have development.
Houses
that
are
occurs.
falling into the ocean right now there. So
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
so it is changing.
Then there's that. Then there's that. So, I think, and I use the word thoughtful because I think that we need to be, and I'll just lump myself in with you guys because I'm helping you to solve a problem, is that there needs to be a thoughtful approach. It needs to consider all the stakeholders' input, and there needs to be a balance. You need to be able to serve it. People need to be able to get to it. They need to be able to store their cars or ride the bus, or, there's a lot of things that need to, and I say calibrate, right? So you can have a big, tall building, but if you can't necessarily serve it, or there's, you got to turn that dial down, and maybe it won't be tall buildings everywhere, like a big city where it's, maybe it's low here, even in I was going to say, even in big cities. So Baltimore, St. Petersburg, and I'm trying to think, there is a practice of sitting back from the waterfront. You may have these lower flung, maybe they're 3-story buildings, 2-story, 3 buildings, and then once you get beyond a certain, usually a street, then the buildings get tall. But you preserve that sort of, not only a feel, but it's like it almost expands your waterfront because tall buildings are here versus here. And it opens it up for everybody for more people to enjoy. So, but that's just one way of looking at it. And there's probably lots of examples of that in other cities and how they step back from the water. Right now, in your waterfront overlay district, I think the setback is 20 feet. That's not a lot. I mean, that's an area of improvement that could be fashioned into this.
Mhm.
So I was a little surprised when I saw in that initial plan, the intermodal waterfront district, that they had those developments right up on the water. So anyway, back to my list. So after you have your regulating plan, and that could be informed by working with the developer on an agreement. An agreement is a binding legal agreement that sets forth all the development limits, maximums, parameters, design, XYZ, whatever you want to include in there. You would be able to go forward and amend your comprehensive plan. As I mentioned before, I envision that there would be at least one new category, if not 3 new categories, that would be specific to, it wouldn't be everywhere in the city, but it would be specific to those areas. And then once you had that, you could start to amend your land development code to be consistent and to expand upon that and that was essentially my thoughts on it. I did think that during the regulating plan, the engagement should include what I called a private development and a public finance 101 workshops. So maybe even having somebody from the development community, a realtor, that would come in and talk about how the decision-making process is for developing a piece of land, and then relative to public finances, or what's the better word for that, Matt? Public finance, is that what it's called? Or
For which part? For the infrastructure?
like understanding ad valorem taxes and how you public finance. Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be a workshop. So you come there and you learn, ask questions, provide input. And then there'd be key stakeholder interviews. So sitting down with landowners, homeowners, business owners, developers, and government agencies, DOT, Pasco County, FEMA. I mean, whomever else would be interested in development at this scale within the community. So I apologize for not bringing slides because I probably would have made it a lot on everybody. But I forgot about, I didn't know this was going forward.
So from our standpoint, we're just looking to see if there's anything that in what she's recommending to go forward with needs to be changed when in addition to, because the next step after this really is to get it to council and start breaking up into contracts to be able to start moving forward with it. I don't know if there's anybody that wants to add, subtract, questions on anything she's recommending.
Well, if I know probably the community, there's time as of the essence, maybe people want to see something happen. But if you were able to wait through the summer to see if you got that grant, because if you start working on this, then you won't necessarily be able to get reimbursed.
Yeah, well, I think there's elements that you know from our discussions. I think there's elements that lend better to the grant versus things we have to do anyways.
Yeah,
I think that's where once we're done, you and I need to get together and kind of break that out for.
It's a great opportunity, and if it comes to fruition, it would be nice to use that for your overall.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think relative to your code, you've got what's called a Euclidean zoning district. Now they have form-based codes, which are less worried about the land uses, but more concerned about the form of the buildings, which is really what you want in a place like this, because you don't want to necessarily say put the building wherever you want, just set back. You want to say put the building here so we can create this outdoor room and those pedestrian walkways and the street trees so everything is working together without having to do a full-on master plan, which that's pricey. So
Question, comment, concern?
On the speaking of the grant, and while we apply for that, waiting to get that back, and this way start to do some of this stuff. Obviously, it doesn't go backwards if we just use this 96,000, for instance. Say we spent 30, well then we would only, and then we get the grant. Only 66,000 would be applicable to the grant. When does that 30,000? Is that once we actually write the check to pay, or once it's encumbered, where we have an agreement in place? And the reason I ask is let's say Tammy's, I guess your firm would be doing the work, obviously, right? So,
well, that would need to be. I'm one person, and I don't have I don't have design tools, so it would probably need to be.
well, so let's say
I can advise.
all this work's being done.
Yeah.
Right now, we're waiting on a grant. You've not billed and been paid for anything until the very end. Just to figure out how this works. And halfway through, we get the grant. You continue to work. Bill and that. Is that full amount able to be used for the grant, or how's that work?
Well, I think the behind the scenes on this is we will look at it and kind of break out what are the things that are in this scope of work that are better aligned with that planning grant versus not aligned with it.
So it's not aligned with that.
Yeah, so then we take those out, and maybe it comes up, well, geez, actually 80% of this aligns with that, but 80% of it is more than what the grant is, right? So that 20%, we would already say, okay, we're going to be spending this money. If we want to do this, we're going to be spending this money out of our pocket anyways. And so that's how I kind of envision our discussion to go, is kind of breaking those out to see which parts really align well with the grant itself. I mean, like she's bringing up, form-based codes. That's 100%. I think what that grant is. As we talked about it, that's part of what that grant was aimed at.
It's essentially the regulating plan. So it's the plan for the form-based code, essentially, and then the form-based code, or whatever it is. You're not tied to a form-based code. You could do something hybrid, or one. And if you don't get the grant, one of the things that you might look toward is what I called but it's called a site plan controlled zoning district. It's almost like you're planned unit development. And your planned unit development, I think where it had the issue was that it's 5 acres, has to be at least 5 acres, and there might be some other things in there. But, for instance, the city of Tampa has what's called a site plan controlled zoning district, and it can handle very little lots. So, in the inner city where you've got infill, they don't really meet the intent of your updated code. So it's a way for you to have whomever's going to be developing it to say, this is what we're doing, that they actually show you before you give them the zoning. So it's not just sort of right now, somebody could come in and say, we would like to have the commercial mixed use or C3. We want to have C3 zoning. There's really no stipulation that the city says, well, show us the site plan. What are you thinking of? You pretty much give them the zoning and then hope that you can massage the site plan when it comes in for site plan review. This is given that site plan control at the time of zoning. So, but the planned unit development is kind of like that too.
So, again, my $75,000 grant, I assume that's not a matching grant, right? They give $75,000 to you. So the total here is 96. That leaves 21,000 that would be out of pocket. So if we
Ballpark.
right,
Could be
well,
less,
just use this as the exact number for the purpose of the question. So if we say we're going to contract this $96,000 worth of work, right, knowing that the potential for the grant is $75,000, we start going down that path and we spend $21,000. By the time we spent $21,000, that $75,000 grant comes in. We can
Go
apply
back.
that with all the future stuff with it because we've contracted with you for the package, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't know how to agree.
So I do have an old contract. We just did one of the Zephyr Hills this past year. I can look at that contract to make sure you're not signing to say that I promised, pinky swear, that we've never, like we're just starting on this right now. And it's because you're saying like we can get going, and then by the time we're actually billing,
Traditionally, you want to get the grant before you do anything.
Yeah.
You got the grant, now we pick up the services.
but there might be some things that you can do in advance because there is going to be a delta between what you're getting and what you're probably going to be spending.
Right.
So can we figure out what those pieces, like for instance, the grant does not anticipate working with the developer, the development agreement. That's not, if you decided to go that
Right.
might not even be necessary, but
It sounds like we need to construct it so we have a $75,000 piece
yeah.
set aside for the whole grant and then work on the other things that fall outside of that. Is that
And where's the money coming from?
with the 21,000?
Yeah.
Well, our budget process, we'd have to. Now, is it budgeted at all? Any of this already?
You'd have to figure that out.
But that question, this is not something that we had to do this, right? So we're going to have to spend some amount of money here.
You don't have to do anything.
So we're required to do something for the.
You don't have to do anything.
This
If we
was
want
just
to do it right,
this was the last
we need to
piece.
do something.
Coming out of that survey effort, we said we'd do an outline, kind of an approach to next steps. So it was, a lot of ideas and needs to be, looked at and fleshed out. And,
Right. And another thing I'll say on that is obviously whatever we spend here that has potential to generate future income. So it's
It's
an investment in the
It's
process.
an investment, yep.
Yeah.
Especially if you find that it would be interesting to learn from property owners is, what is holding back the area from achieving that initial intermodal waterfront district vision that was because
So I want to make sure that we are able to fully utilize that $75,000. I don't want to
oh,
do
you
something where we're
yeah,
going to lose some of that value.
yeah.
Any other questions on that? Concerns, comments, additions, subtractions?
Did you want to add anything? About the-
Public want to engage in this?
What's that?
You want to say anything?
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
I was just curious.
The mic.
Coordinate.
Mike.
Dave Mueller, 5439.
Blue Point Drive.
Got it. I was trying to coordinate that $75,000 grant. I don't recall if it was on the grant list. Is there a reason why things aren't getting updated? And
Well, that list is what was been going through our grant coordinator.
right,
So this didn't go through the grant coordinator. This is something that was submitted by Tammy.
I agree.
Yep.
But that's the control point that everything should go through, whether they submit it at that control point or fire or police or whomever or utilities. I would think it'd be one-stop shopping rather than have to hunt like Easter eggs, or let's put it in real terms, scallops, and find the documents. So, part of moving forward with a good organization is good structure and good procedure. So
So noted.
all I'm doing is making a suggestion.
So noted.
It was probably like partially my fault because
I'm trying to connect the dots.
we'll do better.
Anything else? If
Motion
not,
adjourned.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Closed.
That's my auditor.